Have you ever noticed how some classes just, I don't know, click for you, you're
Yeah.
engaged, you feel motivated, and the learning just seems to happen almost easily.
Yeah.
But then there are others, right, where maybe despite having a really great, knowledgeable teacher, it just feels like a struggle. It
Mm.
makes you wonder, what's the secret ingredient there? Is it just what teachers are doing? Or maybe is it something uh, more subtle, like how you see what they're doing?
That's a great question.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into a really fascinating study that looks at exactly this. It's called The Effect of Students' Perceptions of Teachers' Beliefs and Teaching Strategies on Students' Motivation and Achievement in English.
Right.
And it was done by M. Zaima, Rifnaldi, M. Kolis, and Ria Ramayanti over at Universitas Negeri Padang in Indonesia.
Yeah, this research, it really gets into a fundamental question, I think. For anyone in education, or, well, anyone who's ever been a student, really,
Yeah.
how do university students' perceptions, how they see their English teachers' beliefs and strategies, how does that actually impact their motivation and, their achievement? We're talking about a compulsory English course here.
So required for everyone.
Exactly. It's really a look at that human element in learning.
So we're going to explore the teacher side first, what they believe, how they try to put those beliefs into practice. Then we'll flip it. Look at the student's perspective. What did they actually perceive? And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. We'll connect those perceptions to student motivation and, crucially, their success, their achievement.
Yeah, the links there are key.
Get ready for maybe some aha moments, because this deep dive, it really offers a path to understanding a vital, maybe often overlooked aspect of effective learning.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's start at the source with the teachers. What did this study actually reveal about what they believed regarding their teaching, and how did those beliefs show up in their classroom actions?
Okay, so the researchers surveyed 12 English lecturers. These were teachers at Universitas Negeri Padang, drawn from the 20, who teach this specific compulsory English course.
Right.
And these are for first-year students, importantly, who aren't actually English majors.
Okay, so a general requirement.
Exactly. And what they found was, well, pretty striking. Across the board, these teachers held very strong beliefs in their teaching choices, their strategies.
Strong beliefs. How strong are we talking?
Well, for instance, their average belief score across all the different language skills and components, speaking, writing, reading, listening, grammar, vocab, it averaged out at 3.94 out of 5. That's categorized as high.
That is high.
And it got even higher for listening skills. Their beliefs there were rated very high, 4.31.
Wow, 4.31 out of 5. That's almost perfect conviction in that area.
It really shows strong conviction, yeah.
Yeah.
They really believed in using acted strategies, things like simulation, role play, free talking for speaking. And for listening, they were big on using songs, YouTube clips, that kind of thing.
Okay, so a really strong sense of purpose, definite belief in those interactive methods. But how did that, translate into the day-to-day, into their actual classroom strategies? Did the beliefs always line up perfectly with what happened in class?
Well, that's where things get quite interesting. While their actual implementation, their teaching strategies also averaged high overall at 3.48.
Still high, but a little lower than the belief score.
Exactly. There was this consistent, maybe sometimes subtle, but definite gap between what they strongly believed and what they could always, enact in the classroom.
A gap. Okay. Even with such strong beliefs, that's fascinating. Can you give us some specific examples of where this gap showed up? Because I imagine even a subtle difference could be felt by students.
Absolutely. So take writing skills, teachers' beliefs, averaged high 3.72. But their actual strategies used for teaching writing, those are categorized as middle, down at 3.22.
Okay, that's a noticeable drop from high belief to middle practice.
Yeah. And similarly for vocabulary, beliefs were high, 3.81, strategies implemented, middle, 3.16. Even in listening, remember where beliefs were very high.
Yeah, the 4.31.
Right. Even there, only 2 of their 3 main strategies were consistently implemented at a high level. The third one, which was using multimedia books, actually fell to middle in practice.
So, despite really believing in these approaches, sometimes they couldn't fully execute them. Why? I mean, this raises a big question. Why do you think that gap existed? Did the study suggest what might be getting in the way?
It did. The study points towards external factors playing a pretty significant role.
Like what?
Things like, well, inadequate campus facilities.
Hmm.
You can believe in multimedia, but if the tech isn't reliable.
Right, hard to implement.
Exactly.
That-
Or difficulties in class management, maybe larger class sizes making certain activities trickier. Limited teaching time was another big one.
Oh yeah, time pressure is always a factor.
Definitely. It can force a teacher who, believes in doing extensive role plays to maybe cut them short or simplify them.
Makes sense.
And finally, just the challenges in addressing the diverse characteristics of the students. Different levels, different needs. So teachers, even with strong beliefs, often had to adjust their strategies based on those real-world classroom constraints.
It sounds like a constant balancing act.
It really is.
Okay, so we've got the teacher's perspective. Strong convictions, but facing practical hurdles that sometimes create a gap between belief and action. Let's switch focus now. How did all of this land with the students? What did they perceive? We're talking about those 150 randomly selected first-year students.
Right. Well, the overall picture from the students was actually very positive. Their average perception score for their teachers' beliefs was 3.5. That's categorized as positive.
So they generally felt their teachers had a good approach, a clear philosophy.
It seems so, yeah. They picked up on the teachers having sort of beneficial intentions and beliefs about teaching English.
Okay. And what about the strategies themselves, the actual teaching they experienced? Did they perceive those positively too? Did they feel the teachers were putting those beliefs into action?
Okay, now this is where it gets really fascinating, I think. Their perception of the teacher's teaching strategies was actually even stronger.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the mean score was 3.98, also firmly in the positive category.
Wow, so even higher than their perception of the beliefs.
Exactly, which kind of suggests that students recognized their teachers were, in fact, implementing their beliefs through what they did in the classroom, even with those subtle gaps we talked about from the teacher side.
So they saw the effort, the application.
It looks like it.
Yeah.
It speaks to a certain level of effectiveness, even with those practical hurdles the teachers faced.
Interesting.
But there's a small nuance worth mentioning.
Okay.
Students' perceptions for both beliefs and strategies related to listening skills were a bit less strongly positive compared to other skills.
Any idea why that might be? Listening was where teacher belief was highest.
Well, the study suggests it might be tied to the student's own experiences trying to develop listening skills. Perhaps it's an area that students just inherently find more challenging regardless of the teaching, or maybe those specific strategy implementations felt slightly less effective to them. It's hard to say for sure from this data alone.
Right. Could be a few things going on there. Okay, so we've looked at teacher intentions, their actions, the realities they face, and then how students perceived all of that generally positively. Now, let's connect this to the bottom line. Student motivation and achievement. How did the students actually do in this course?
All right, so based on their final exam scores, the study divided the students into two groups, high achievers and low achievers.
Okay.
And it wasn't an even split, a significant chunk, 52.67%. So just over half were high achievers. Their average score was pretty good, 84.5.
And the other half? The low achievers.
They made up the remaining students, obviously. Their average scoring is 71.9.
So 84.5 versus 71.9, that's what, a 12.6 point difference in the average score between the two groups?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a pretty substantial achievement gap. Easily the difference between doing well and just sort of scraping by for many students. It really highlights the stakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about motivation? How did that factor into these different achievement levels? Was there a clear link between how motivated a student felt and how well they actually performed on that final exam?
Oh, absolutely. A very clear link. The study measured student motivation using a few different categories. Things like positive task orientation, which is basically focusing on mastering the material itself.
Right, learning for learning's sake.
Kind of, yeah. Then ego involvement, where success or failure is tied more to your self-worth.
Okay.
And also perseverance, just sticking with it even when it gets tough.
Grit, basically.
Pretty much. And what they found was a really clear correlation. The high-achieving students showed significantly higher levels of motivation overall. Their average motivation score was 103.5. Compared to the low-achieving students, whose average motivation score was 95.9.
So again, quite a difference there. Almost 8 points on the motivation scale.
Yeah, it's not just a slight variation. It really reinforces that idea. We often talk about motivation and achievement are very closely intertwined. One seems to fuel the other.
Okay, so we've laid out all these different pieces, haven't we? We've got teacher beliefs, their actual strategies, the gaps that sometimes appear, student perceptions of all that, and then motivation and achievement. For you listening, how do these maybe seemingly separate parts actually weave together? What's the big takeaway message here?
Well, if we try and connect all these dots, bring it together into the bigger picture, the study's most significant finding, really the headline, is this. Students' perceptions, how they saw their teachers' beliefs and teaching strategies, had a significant effect on their motivation, and crucially, on their achievement in learning English.
A significant effect. How significant are we talking statistically?
Very significant. The statistical analysis, the math behind it, showed a really strong connection. The p-value was less than 0.001.
Okay, for those of us not deep in stats, what does p less than 0.0001 mean practically?
It basically means the odds of seeing this strong connection just by random chance are incredibly low, less than 1 in 1,000. So we can be very confident that this relationship is real and meaningful.
Got it. So a very strong, statistically significant link.
Exactly. It means that students who had more positive perceptions of what their teachers believed and how they taught, they weren't just more motivated to learn.
They actually got higher scores.
Precisely. The numbers bear it out. For example, those high-achieving students, they had markedly more positive perceptions of their teachers' beliefs, scoring 4.16 on average compared to 3.89 for the low achievers. And same pattern for perceptions of strategies, 3.81 for high achievers versus 3.63 for low achievers.
So the students who did better saw the teaching more positively across the board.
That's what the data shows. It suggests they felt more supported, maybe more understood by their lecturers. And that feeling, that positive perception, seems to have directly fueled their motivation, which then, consequently, led to better learning outcomes.
Yeah.
Better grades.
Wow. That's actually quite powerful, isn't it? It really suggests it's not just about the teacher having, great subject knowledge, or even just using technically good teaching methods.
Right.
It seems to be profoundly about the student's interpretation of it all, how they receive that instruction. It really highlights the impact that maybe understanding and connection can have in the classroom environment. I wonder, did the study mention anything else that might influence motivation and achievement? Obviously, perception is key here, but were other factors acknowledged?
Well, the study's main focus was definitely perception. But yeah, the findings naturally make you think about the whole picture, right? Learning is complex.
Yeah.
The researchers did acknowledge that, students' individual differences, prior knowledge, learning styles, and maybe even personality, those things play a role too. Of course they do.
Right.
But the strength of this perception, motivation, achievement link within this specific course context, it really stood out as a primary factor driving success. It just underscores that how students feel about the teaching they're getting is, well, really paramount.
So what we've learned today from this deep dive, it feels genuinely powerful. It seems it's just not enough for teachers to have strong beliefs and use good strategies.
Right.
How students perceive those beliefs and strategies seems to be this incredibly critical factor. It drives their motivation and ultimately their achievement.
Yeah, it really does. And this study, I think, implied something really vital for educators, for teachers,
It is.
the importance of, well, transparency, open communication.
Ah, okay.
English teachers, maybe really all teachers, should seriously consider informing students about their beliefs, discussing their chosen teaching strategies, maybe before the learning really kicks off.
Sort of explaining the why behind the what.
Exactly. It could help bridge any of those perception gaps we saw, make things clearer, and potentially really enhance student engagement, maybe their buy-in to the whole process.
That makes a lot of sense. So as you listening, reflect on your own learning journey, maybe classes you loved or classes you struggled with, or perhaps if you teach, think about your own classroom. Here's a final provocative thought for you. How might actively involving students in understanding why certain teaching approaches are chosen, going beyond just what is taught for? How might that transform not just their learning, but maybe also their sense of agency, their feeling of ownership over their own education?